Welcome back, dear crime lovers. This is a new episode of the history of the American Mafia, written for podcast by Fabio Fabiano and translated and read by me, Grace Cadlisi. I hope you enjoy this new episode. The Banana Society, Part 1. The cases we have dealt with up to now all related to the Black Hand and all took place in New York. All over the USA there was ignorance, fear and a lack of cooperation from the majority of the public because of urban isolation and a great atavistic distrust in the authorities. However, there were some exceptions, for example this case that took place in the Midwest. Today's protagonist was a man who decided not to give in and not to keep quiet. We are in Columbus, in Ohio. It's January 1909. Exasperated by the constant extortion requests and the macabre modus operandi typical of the Italian-American criminal organization, which consisted in threats on his children's lives or bombs that would explode and blow up everything he owned, the man decided to go to the Federal Police Post Office in his town and report everything. The courageous and enterprising victim was Giuseppe Amicone. He was a merchant from Molise, born in Forlì del Sannio, with a distinctive large dark moustache. He arrived with his family in the new continent in 1882, little more than a boy. At first he found a job as a street sweeper in Chicago, but later, following the flow of workers on the new railway lines, he arrived in Ohio with his older brother Carlo. There he opened a fruit distribution and trading business called the Banana Kings. This proved to be a winning move. In fact, the business profits started to increase remarkably. The Amicone brothers Americanized their surname into Amicon, and they were perfectly integrated in the Columbus society. They sold the fruit they imported from Mexico, Brazil, Hawaii, and also traded apricots, oranges, and lemons that they grew on their properties in Colorado and in California. The two brothers both had beautiful families, large houses, and their business was booming, enough to be one of the prominent members of the city of Columbus. In January 1909, for the first time, the Black Hand, who were always well informed about the Italians who had higher than average incomes, paid a visit to John Amicone. John had already heard about the threats and the blackmail letters sent to others in town, and he knew that many were paying protection, so-called, to certain Sicilians that called themselves friends. On the arrival of the first letter, despite the insistence of his wife and brother Charles to pay the $10,000 requested by the blackmailers, John was determined and had made his decision. No, I will not pay even $0.1. We left Italy, where we lived in poverty, to come to America, the land of opportunity. I am an American citizen now. I am free. The second extortion letter arrived soon after. It had a Pennsylvania postmark stamped on it. But John Amicone was not intimidated. After other letters, a much more concrete threat arrived. On the porch of his home, wrapped in a newspaper from Pittsburgh, he received a stick of dynamite and a dagger with the following handwritten message: "The next one will be in your back." After having turned in vain to the Italian consulate in Cincinnati, he hired a private investigator. After careful investigations, he had the name of the suspected authors of the intimidating missives. With those names, Amicone went without hesitation to file a report. It was January the 20th, 1909. At the office, he met the Columbus police inspector John Frank Oldfield, a tall 40-year-old former sheriff born in Maryland. John Amicone gave him the blackmail letters and objects he had received, including the dynamite. He also gave the inspector the two suspects' names Salvatore Lima, or Sam, and his brother-in-law Sebastiano, known as Sebastian, both immigrants from Sicily. The two ran a fruit shop in Marion, just over 40 miles from Columbus. Amicone was sure he had noticed them wandering around his warehouse in the same period that coincided with the arrival of the letters and the other threats. He was so sure about this that he was ready to testify in a courtroom if asked. Oldfield sensed the extent of Amicone's statement. He was the first Italian-American to accuse the Black Hand. Sam Lima was the owner of the company S. Lima & Co. Fruit Commissioner, with fruit and food sale activities. The greengrocer's wife, sister and brother-in-law Sebastian helped out in the business too. Sam's father, Antonio, was a former customs agent from Trabia, near Palermo. He had fled from Italy like many other criminals in that same period to escape a murder sentence. He came to New Orleans and later went to live in Cincinnati, in the big industrial center of Marion. Sam Lima had arrived and sensed the possibility of doing business with the many immigrants who worked for the Marion Steam Shovel, a company that produced the equipment and machinery. On the outside of the store, they hung bunches of bananas and placed crates of imported apples and pineapples. It was located in the same building where they lived. The shop windows facing the street showed sacks of flour and wheat, as was the case in most American shops of that kind. But that store hid another lucrative business, not at all legitimate. Inside, well hidden, there was an arsenal of daggers, knives, stylets. In addition, there were sheets of paper containing coded messages and threats. The centerpiece was a leather ledger with a series of Italian people's names associated with figures in dollars. Finally, another list of names of Sicilian men who, like him, belonged to a company curiously called Della Banana, of bananas. Lima was the head of a criminal organization which included his brother-in-law Sebastian, his father Antonio, and his sister's husband Giuseppe Gnoffo, who was a Sicilian living in Toledo, a town about 100 miles from Cleveland. In the back room, Sam Lima also kept thousands of dollars in cash and many receipts for postal payments made to Sicily, where his mother Annunziata still lived. In his early 30s, Sam Lima was at the top of the Banana Society, succeeding another older Sicilian, Salvatore Arrigo. The original name of the criminal group, which terrorized especially the wealthy Italian Americans of the Midwest and New York, was given by the fact that the members were almost fruit sellers. Their secret code was also full of metaphors involving fruit. A car loaded with lemons decoded indicated a large sum of money obtained from extortion. However, when the coffers were full of lemons, it meant that no substantial loot had been made from the extortion activity. When they exchanged messages to communicate that one of the members had sent a bribe letter to a victim, they used to write the following sentence: "Tom, Dick and Harry are very old. I just consulted a doctor who advised them to eat bananas." The criminal group was made up of Sicilian immigrants in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. Among them, the Vicario brothers, originally from Messina, Pippino Galbo from Caccamo, Orazio Runfola from Valle d'Olmo, Saverio Ventola from Termini Emerese, as well as Francesco Spadaro, son of a criminal who had died in prison in Palermo. The ranks of criminals continued to widen with the entry of young offenders and assassins. Since autumn 1908, the leadership of the gang was entrusted to Sam Lima. The criminal organization had made a qualitative leap, grabbing huge illicit profits and power. The system broke down when the Marion's post office employee became suspicious of the considerable amount of money Sam Lima was sending to his mother in Sicily. In February 1909, Sebastian Lima went, as usual, to the post office in his town, and As usual, he sent thousands of dollars to Italy and several letters whose addresses bore the names of several cities in the Midwest and New York State. As the request for postage, the clerk gave him some postage stamps. Sam, gluing them to the letters, didn't notice a tiny and almost imperceptible red dot inside the letter O and in the word to. The reality was not a graphite error, but it was a shrewd expedient put in place by Inspector Oldfield to trace the movements of the correspondence between the Sicilians of the criminal organization. What's more, the shrewd investigator in the following days received from the post office a list of the cities and people to whom the letters were sent to by Sam Lima's brother-in-law. Who those missives were intended for and what their content was are the topics we'll deal with in our next podcast. Stay tuned.